Welcome to Agents Confidential, Brian. We're so happy to have you.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, guys.
For those that don't know, we have Brian Platte joining us today. My voice is Eric with Yana here, and we're really excited to have our first guest in studio on the Agents Confidential podcast.
Mm-hmm.
How confidential is that?
We'll be having confidential cocktails later.
Will we now?
Yes.
Yep.
It is Friday.
Mocktails. Mocktails for Dry Jan.
There we go.
So we wanted to bring Brian on today because he is, a successful business owner and also is great with succession planning. So we wanted to bring him on to help you.
Who is Brian Platte?
Brian Platte is our fearless leader.
Owner and operator of Agent Equity Group.
You know, thinking about your insurance business, we are in the insurance business. So our job is to protect others. But what about protecting your own business? Without a succession plan, your revenue stream can disappear overnight. And in this episode, we're going to show you how to ensure the future of your hard-earned income.
Sounds kind of like a hope for the best, prepare for the worst.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Yeah.
Maybe an insurance policy for your insurance revenue.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I always talk, when I talk with agents about this, everybody seems like they agree it's a good idea,
Mm-hmm.
but do they take the time to do it? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like those great opportunities that we look at, consider, but don't take action on, or I'll get to that when I'm reached this level or that level. Like, Brian, you want to talk a little bit about just like the time it takes?
Yeah, I could totally relate to that. This is my 21st year in the business now. And I did everything wrong that you could think of. There's not too many things that I didn't do backwards because I really didn't have necessarily a mentor or anything like that. I mean, even down to like, I guess I should pay taxes, like just the basics because nobody really tells you. And I think that, over my tenure as an agent, that role has evolved into, just starting out where it wasn't a career, right? It was a means to pay my bills and
buy guitars.
And actually, the big reason I got into insurance was so that I could afford my musical habits.
Yep.
And in fact, I recall that when I got started in the business, I think my monthly expenses personally were like $1,500 a month, so cell phone, car note, things like that. So the bar was really low, but in my head, that was like, oh crap, like we got to make at least $1,500 a month just to, pay the bills type thing. And then that evolves into, now you're bringing in surplus revenue. And what do we do with that? Do we reinvest it? So on and so forth. And then that led into, building an agency, bringing people on board. All of a sudden, you're responsible for other people. Hey, I never signed up for this. What's happening? And you just kind of find yourself in this position where you're not responsible for your own income, but you're responsible for other people's livelihood as well, too. And that was a long 20-year drawn out process for me. I probably didn't start taking it serious till the 5th year. I took the business serious, but I just didn't really have any direction or anything like that, or it wasn't even on the radar. And the thoughts going through my head were, that's for later. I started the business when I think I got licensed when I was 21, 22, something like that. So succession planning was the most foreign concept.
You're worried about going broke versus like having this live on forever.
Yeah, almost like, hey, if something happens to me, that might be the best thing.
Take me
I
out.
get rid of this debt and everything. And so, yeah, I think putting yourself in the mindset of you're never too small to get started and start planting those seeds and thinking that through. At least for me, it was a long, drawn-out process. If for the listeners, I would say advice from a veteran is take yourself more serious than what you think. And life has a way of sneaking up on you and giving you surprises. Of course, being in the FMO space now, we've witnessed this firsthand where we've had agents pass away, agents get severely ill and things like that. And I think succession planning for me started to really get on the radar, if you will, when I saw that firsthand. Like a lot of things in life, you know, you don't take it serious until it's right in front of you.
Yeah, until maybe it happens to somebody you know, or something like
So
that.
it becomes serious, really.
So we talk about this. A lot of people have the say they like the idea. Like, can you tell our listeners flat out, like, without doing the planning, what happens to that residual income if they pass away, or maybe just can't do the work anymore if they're, you know, injured or what have you? Like, doesn't everything just keep going automatically?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And a lot of that has to do, if you kind of boil that down to the product level, different products are going to have more capabilities than others when it comes to that reoccurring revenue, the renewals that you get. And for those that are listening, I would assume that a lot of us are probably in the Medicare space, maybe do some ACA. Anything that requires an annual certification in order to continue getting paid is going to be anybody that does that is going to be in a position where they're going to want to protect that. If you are incapacitated, whether it's a car accident, whatever it is, or, you know, unfortunately pass away, that income stops. And we've seen that firsthand with many agents, unfortunately now. And from a timing standpoint, pretty much everything in this business, nothing is standardized, right? So every carrier is going to have their different rules and everything. I know of carriers that it's like 90 days, right?
What?
90 days after you pass away, it stops. Other carriers, you know, it's when they get notified by the state type thing. So every carrier will take the liberty to kind of have their own procedures and everything. As a general rule, the bigger the company, maybe companies like UHC, Aetna, things like that, they usually have defined rules in place where some of your regional carriers, they're like, oh yeah, we've never even thought about this ourselves type thing. And of course it's becoming something, it's on the radar more and more now that the average age of an agent in the industry, don't quote me on this, but it's around 60 years old. It might even be a little older now. And when you think about the Medicare ACA market, it's a relatively young market. You know, when you think about the fact that Medicare Advantage is about 20 years old now. ACA started back in 2014, so about 10, 11 years ago. Other parts of the industry, like the P&C side of the industry, they've gone through this whole cycle many, many times. I mean, over 50, 60, 70 years. And so now we're getting to a point 20 years into this where people are aging. People that started in the business when they were 40, they're in their 60s now. And essentially, companies are seeing this more and more and starting to put actual processes in place. But
so what you're saying is other industries have this like more taken care of, or it's
I think it's a little more like evolved and thought out.
Normal practice.
Yeah. Okay. We're on the Medicare ACA side. The industry is relatively young to where it's not been needed. The sheer number of people dying or becoming incapacitated is a small number, but that will continue to grow and grow and grow. So we're huge advocates of, you know, working with insurance companies and putting just the whole concept of succession planning on their radar, because many times, unfortunately, when we reach out to carriers, they're like, we don't even have a process for that. We've never thought about that, which is kind of scary when you think about it. So
what's really scary to me, and I believe agents need to hear this and really consider. So what you're telling me, Brian, is if, let's say I'm a, you know, husband, wife, one of us is an insurance agent, we're the breadwinners, and something terrible happens to that spouse, that literally that income, that, you know, 200,000-300,000 or more annual recurring revenue can just be gone.
Yeah, it could literally disappear overnight if you don't have any plans in place. And we've seen it firsthand. It's a scary thought. It kind of puts your own mortality into focus as well.
Well, and I know other agents have been very successful building large practices, and you want that to move on, not only for your surviving spouse, but your employees, your clients, if you want your name of the business to live on, to have somebody taking that over and continuing forward, you really have to do the planning.
Yeah.
What's involved in that? Like,
well, let's back up a little bit on that. So when do you want to start thinking about doing succession planning,
yeah.
right? The answer is do it as soon as you can. And I was thinking about this and I was like, gosh, if you've been in the business for 4 or 5 years, this is a career, definitely.
If this is your main point of income, you're
Exactly.
not, it's not a side hustle anymore.
You could also look at it from a revenue standpoint. I mean, you could be in the business for a year and somebody that just kind of launches really quick and you have a sizable income revenue coming in where, yeah, you should do that sooner than later. There's also agents that kind of do things part-time and build slowly. Nothing wrong with that. They might be in the business for 5 years and maybe have 50 policies on the books. Nonetheless, I think what you want to ask yourself is, if the income that is derived from my business were to stop and that were to impact my family or employees or anything like that, then the answer is, yeah, you need to have some sort of succession plan in place. And that could be in different stages too. You don't have to do everything at once. Maybe just starting off going through thinking about like what that might look like, who would be somebody that I would want to take over my book. Maybe you have a spouse that is licensed. Maybe you have a business partner. Maybe it's an upline that you feel comfortable with.
Maybe it's that one agent when we get together that you're actually excited to talk to.
Yeah.
We're all technically competing, but you go to a sales training, you're like, ooh, I want to go sit by that person.
Yeah.
Talk to them about it.
Yeah. We've actually seen that. I could think of a couple scenarios of agents that are very good, friends, colleagues in the industry. And naturally it's like, hey, if something happens to you, you're my person. If something happens to me, kind of in reverse there. So as far as timing goes, that really just kind of depends on revenue, who is dependent on that. But I would say if you are serious about the business, this is going to be a career path, do it sooner than later. Putting some of the things in place later, an agency, things like that we'll discuss a little bit later. It's a lot easier to do that stuff at the beginning. It may seem like overkill, like, wait a second, it's just me, myself, and that's it. Why do I need a business entity? Do I need an agency? And I remember feeling that way. I formed a business entity for myself. I believe it was 5 years in the business. So I was kind of a late bloomer, if you will, like a lot of things, and then I got an agency license. I didn't really understand why I had an agency license because it was just me. I didn't have any employees. It was another 5 years after that. So I was almost 10 years in the business until I started to have agents working underneath me and everything, where that got put into focus. But I'm glad that I did that, put those things in motion, because doing that later just can cause interruptions, can be a little time consuming and kind of throw you off track type thing from the main goal that you're focusing on, which is creating more policies and revenue for the company.
I love there's a saying or a question: when did Noah build the ark?
Yeah.
Before the rain.
Before the rain, yeah.
Before the rain. Before that storm comes of all of this success and things like that, let's be set up structure-wise so that you can go on this journey and not have to kind of start that business entity over.
Well, isn't it interesting that aren't we in the business of planning for the unforeseen?
We plan for our clients, but not for ourselves.
And that's pretty true in just about anything. Sure, we all have friends, family that maybe work in the construction trades and maybe do amazing work, but their own house is in disarray.
Any landscapers out there? I've worked with some. Their yard never gets the time that they put into others. So if our listeners have identified themselves, they're serious about this business, they've been doing it for a while, and they haven't done a succession plan, do they go to like the local succession plan store? Is there an app?
What's a simple, easy first step they can take?
So the answer to that simply is there is no standard, right? And that's many times, actually a lot, agents will come to me and say, hey, can we do a business succession, a webinar or something like that? And it's difficult because there are so many variables, and it really is kind of a personal thing, your unique situation. But there are some things that you can do that I think are pretty standardized. The first thing that I would recommend our listeners do is, if you are not already incorporated, meaning you have a business entity, that would be step number one. And, I remember back when I formed my business entity, in my head, I was a 20-something-year-old. I'm like, could have a business entity. Like, when did this become serious, type of thing. I'm becoming the man, So as far as getting a business entity set up, I think that you can get in this thought process of analysis paralysis, overthinking it. The two main types of business entities that an agent are going to set up traditionally are going to be either an LLC or an S corp. Essentially, those are flow-through entities where your income flows to your personal income tax. And I see a lot of people get hung up on, do I do an LLC or an S corp? And they essentially accomplish the same thing. It doesn't really matter. Disclaimer here, I'm not an attorney.
We don't give tax advice.
We're not giving tax advice. I think if you're just starting off, whether you go LLC or S corp, it's not going to matter. And when the time comes where maybe it does matter down the road, you can always recharacterize your company. So switch from an LLC to a S corp and an S corp to an LLC, or there are more advanced things like partnerships and C corps, things like that, which most of us in the industry will probably never get to the point where those types of entities make sense. For me personally, it was as simple as I just thought it sounded sexy to have Inc. at the back or the end of my name rather than LLC. That was literally the logic that I was thinking of.
Well, and
That's so funny.
Isn't a big thing or an important part of doing that just separating your personal assets from
Absolutely.
your business?
Absolutely. And that's, goes into another topic, but yeah, that is definitely something that is a byproduct of succession planning or just setting up a business, is separating your business from your personal assets. The next question would be, how do you set up a business entity, right?
Great question.
What is the process for
Prompting
that?
himself. He's a great guest.
I love it.
Just kick back.
So back when I set up mine, I went through an attorney. This was, back in 2008, I believe. I didn't know what I didn't know. Going through an attorney is probably overkill. An attorney is going to have minimum fees that they are going to charge just to make it worth their time. And again, it was overkill. I think I ended up paying maybe $1,000 or something like that. And over time, once I started to learn about how easy it actually is to set up a business entity, it's like, oh, wow, that probably didn't need to do that. And this doesn't mean that I'm anti-attorney or anything like that. So there are advanced scenarios maybe where, for example, there's a partnership, which I would not suggest. When you get into business, please do not do a partnership. You may, have a buddy or a colleague in the business where you're like, hey, let's do this together, share resources and everything. I've never seen it work. Every single time it is failed. In fact, I've seen agents not do this once, but like multiple times, lesson continued until lesson learned.
Sounds like marriages, Brian.
It's very much like marriages. You almost gotta ask, would I marry this person, right? So going back to how to set up a business entity, here is my recommendation. There are now, in the dawn of the internet age and the interwebs and everything, there are so many platforms and websites that have streamlined this process that weren't available 10, 15 years ago. I'm not going to name any names here on the podcast, but I think we'll put some suggestions in the show notes for everybody.
Absolutely.
None of them are sponsors, but for a nominal fee, a couple $100, you go through the website and they prompt you through, okay, business name, setting up the process, they file the paperwork and everything like that. And, for a couple $100, it's done. You don't have to overthink it. You don't have to worry about, state specific rules and actually filing this stuff yourself. Now, if you're capable of doing that, you could do that too. But personally, I would just let somebody else do that.
It's worth paying for that convenience.
It's worth paying for that convenience, yeah. And that process will probably take about 30 days, I would say, just depending on the state. And once you have that business entity set up, the next thing would be when you get paid from the insurance companies, they need to pay that tax ID, right? So when you get a business entity, you essentially get a tax ID or a social security number for your business. Sometimes they call it an EIN or just a tax ID. And you want your income to flow and be paid to that business entity. And kind of similar to a trust, where people will set up a trust, but they won't fund the trust. It's just a shell. Same is true with a business entity. If you just have the business entity and you're not flowing your income through that, you're kind of missing the point. Again, I wish this was standardized in the industry, but some insurance companies that you get appointed with, they will allow you to assign your commissions to a business entity, but many will require that you also have an agency license. So the second step is going to be, you're going to want to go ahead and get your agency license, because inevitably there's going to be a carrier that you work with that they're going to say, hey, if you want to assign commissions, the business entity itself also has to be a licensed agency. Luckily, it's a really simple process. You can go on NIPR.com and do that. The fees relating to set up an agency are fairly nominal. Here in the great state of Michigan where we live, the lowest, I believe, I think it's $5 for an individual license and a whopping $10 for an agency license. In other states, I think states like Illinois, California, New York, they might be as high as $400 or $500. But in the grand scheme of things, I think it's fairly nominal to get that set up. And so you'll have your business entity, and then you'll have an agency license. And many times when you get appointed with a carrier, they're going to want you to send in that agency license as well too. This is going in the weeds a little bit here, but it's worth noting that some companies will appoint you at the agent level and the agency level, meaning you'll actually have two writing numbers. You'll have a personal and a business. And many times people goof that up. I know I did, where do I write through the agency number? Do I write through the personal? And again, every company is a little bit different. So if you're working with your FMO, they should be able to point you in the right direction as to kind of set that all up and everything. That would be, step number one. And step number two there is having a business entity with a tax ID, LLC or an S corp, and then going and getting your agency license.
Yeah.
And then you're going to have this imposter syndrome where you're going to be like, okay, I have a business and I'm an agency, but it's just little old me here.
Yeah.
And you're going to feel like it's overkill. And it probably is going to be overkill. And you know what? You may never get to a point, you may never aspire. I know I didn't, to even wanting a legitimate agency where you have staff, where you have agents underneath you. But like a lot of things evolve, right? And
it's better to be prepared.
It's better to be prepared, correct. So where things can get a little complicated is if you're an agent and you're already set up with maybe 10 carriers, yeah, you're going to have a little legwork where you might have to go through recontracting again at the agency level and have that properly set up so the commissions are being assigned to that business entity and that agency. But it's not a lot of work. And again, if you're working with a good FMO, I know we do this with our agents. We're happy
Shameless
to
plug.
Shameless plug.
Agent Equity Group.
Yeah, we'll sit down with you and walk you through this. In fact, it's almost kind of become somewhat of a obsession for me, in that when new agents actually get started, I many times will have them set themselves up as an agency and a business entity. And I know that there's people in the industry that may not agree with that. And I could totally understand. My thought process on that is the cost is so nominal in the grand scheme of things that why not just set yourself up from the beginning?
I almost think like not taking the time to do it is almost an admission of I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if this is serious. I know you've said in the past, like a lot of people work remote or work from home, but signing that lease on that office, you have to be successful.
That's a great point. And that is one of the maybe unintended good consequences that comes from that is all of a sudden you start to take yourself serious and something magical happens where you start to think bigger. At least that was the case for me. And I think for a lot of other people too, you just take yourself serious.
You don't have to be reckless about it, but give yourself some push.
Exactly. But when it comes to, maybe you're 5-10 years into it, you haven't set this stuff up. And maybe you want to hire some LOA agents, and then that could be a roadblock. So you're like, I got to go back. I got to set up a business entity. I got to do this. I got to do that. If you just did it from the beginning or early as possible,
when you have the time,
when your mind expands and that becomes like a possibility, you're like, cool, this is the next step in the evolution of my business. I'm ready for it, and it doesn't have to be this big thing.
And it's not something you're gonna pick up and start doing during AEP.
Right.
But how about in the new year? Or identify if you have a slower month than or season, one or the other, that would be a great time to tackle something like this.
Oh, absolutely. I would say first quarter, maybe through the second quarter would be a good time to do that when you're recovering from the busy season. It's not a full-time project by any stretch of the imagination or anything like that. But yeah, don't do it during your busy season. I've seen this done. It can be done, but it's not the best experience.
Is there any upkeep with an agency license?
It's a great question. So yes, there is. Well, actually, let's go back. This was a thought that I had when I was pursuing getting my agency license. Do you have to take another test? Is there a special requirements? Exactly. In my mind, I thought that there was. I'm like, okay, so what? I've been in the business for 5 years. I'm a nobody, and I'm just gonna get an agency license. Like to me, it seemed a little ludicrous. But you can actually pass your licensing exam for your personal license, and then go and get an agency license the next day. There are literally no requirements. I don't necessarily agree with that. I wish there was, just from the standpoint of knowing what it takes, what the responsibilities are as an agency, because I think it's people really don't know what that means. But to circle back on your question, at a minimum, it depends on the state. Just like your personal license, you have to renew that, okay? Some states are annual. Some states are biannual. So that fee that you pay here in the state of Michigan, it's $10. In other states, it's more. That has to be paid depending on whatever the rules are for that specific state. There are states, too, if you're going to be getting a non-resident license, meaning you're going to be selling in multiple states. One of the things that can be a little complicated is when you just have an individual license, you just go and get the individual license in those additional states. Maybe you're selling in 10 different states. If you have an agency license, you are committing to having to have an agency license in every single state in addition to your individual license. So, for example, if you're an agency in your resident state, you want to add another state, you have to be first licensed as an individual and also as an agency as well too.
You can't separate them.
You can't separate them, and many people try, and
then you're paying a agency license fee, so it's a little bit more expensive.
But you know what? It's minimal. It never ceases to amaze me, is what I should say, on how agents will sometimes give pushback on that. And, for example, if you're licensed, I'm now licensed at the agent and agency level across the entire country, all 50 states, and I believe Puerto Rico as well too. And yeah, it can be quite an investment. I want to say altogether it's like 30 grand, 40 grand. If you do the individual and the agency across every state. Yeah. And then at first my thought was, do I got to pay this every year? And the answer is no. They get split up because some states are biannually. There's a handful of states where you just pay once and then you're good to go for life. So
and we would recommend you have prospects in those states or clients in those states before. Well, I've had agents. I talk to agents all across the country where for our newer agents getting started, if you've been given advice of get licensed in more states so you have more possibilities to sell something. Well, if you live in the Midwest and don't know anybody in Montana, why are you getting an agency license if you're not marketing in that area? People aren't just going to randomly find you, call you and say, hey, I want to buy from you. So grow at a steady pace, but
do it intentionally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So naturally, if you have a client that moves to another state, get licensed in that state. But at the end of the day, the state that you're in, there is more than enough business to support yourself for more business, for most businesses. And I see a lot of agents probably kind of start that process prematurely. And even if you do have one or two people in a state, it might be a better idea, especially depending on the product line. Medicare, for example, there's a lot of different state rules and everything like that. Why not just refer it out to somebody in that state?
Absolutely. I think that's really helpful.
Brian, one other idea that has come up before with succession planning, it's a great way for newer agents. to be mentored by a future selling agent over time until they take over. So I know a lot of newer agents out there that don't have a lot of capital. They're, like you said, when you started, just trying to make it to tomorrow and make, your bills at the end of the month. So say, how can I buy a business? Well, if you start working in tandem with a typically older agent, that you build that know, like, and trust up with them at some point, then you can kind of take over, have them on a, prolonged payout. We've talked about this, and
Yeah, I mean, that opens up a can of worms there. We can go into this whole discussion about, LOA versus having your own thing, and different strokes for different folks. Some of us are more employee minded. Some of us are more entrepreneurial minded. I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is I've always been naturally entrepreneurial, and I just thought everybody thought the same way. And now I'm finding out that I'm a weirdo, which that's fine too. But yeah, being mentored in the business and kind of getting a grasp of how things work. I mean, I could go back and redo my career again. That might be something that I would have done differently. But when you come in the business, let's face it, you really don't have an end in mind. Most of us didn't wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to be an insurance agent.
It's always an interesting journey.
It's always an interesting journey. So you may not have the luxury to even have thought about that when getting in the business. So, but going back to your question, as far as the different ways to set up succession planning, I think that's kind of what you were.
Yeah, I was thinking for like a newer agent. Again, they're not capital heavy. They're not going to buy a book of business.
Sure.
But could start working with that person and learning the ropes of the business. Yeah. Helping them out maybe with some of their case building or customer service, if you will, and then kind of get vested by that selling agent to then take over that book of business.
Yeah, there's so many different scenarios, but yeah, like in that scenario, for example, let's actually kind of reverse engineer that. Let's say you're the agency owner and you have an LO agent or a servicing agent that you're kind of grooming to take things over. Yeah, there's some things that you're going to want to do to prepare yourself for that. And there's kind of like the imminent things, meaning an event has occurred, right? You've been hit by a Mack truck, right? You have unfortunately passed away because of COVID, and you didn't have any plans set up. But let's just assume that you were thinking this through beforehand. So with that being said, one of the things that you're going to want to do is, if you're an agency, I always screw up this acronym. It's DRLP.
I wrote this down. DLRP. Most states require the agency to identify a designated, responsible, licensed producer, sometimes also referred to as a designated responsible person.
Yes.
But both terms refer to someone who is responsible for the agency's compliance with the insurance laws, rules, and regulations for each respective state.
Yeah. So the thing that I think a lot of people confuse with that is that like that person is like an equity owner, is like vested in the company. That person could be changed pretty easily. So they don't have those powers. But when it comes to an event happening, having that designated person makes things a lot easier to get things transferred over. But one of the other things that you'll want to do is you'll want to have some sort of servicing agreement in place. There's a lot of different names. So servicing agreement would be more in the event that like, hey, if something happens to me, this is the person I've identified or the company I've identified. These are the terms and conditions of the buyout, what that looks like, whether it's over time, whether it's money up front, with all the specifics, and you want that notarized. As a general rule, when you are buying a book of business or selling a book of business, typically the carrier is going to want to see something in writing. And this is where a lot of the problems start to occur. If you haven't done that and you're trying to do planning after the fact, you're going to be very limited to what you could do after like an event occurs, where you're not of sound mind or you're deceased type thing. And that succession or servicing agreement, I mean, it doesn't have to be this big legal document. In fact, we had an agent pass away. He was 42, 43. And so definitely wasn't of the age where he was thinking about, the inevitable happening, unfortunately. And he had a thriving business. It was growing really quick. And I think it was just kind of an afterthought. He didn't even get to the point where he was even thinking about that. And him and one of his agency, let's just call it partners, had literally sat down and wrote something out. I almost want to say it was with a marker or a crayon on a napkin, literally. And that actually held up with a couple carriers from what I recall. I mean, it definitely didn't solve all their problems because it was like a 2-year probate thing, getting everything set up and everything and transferred over. Since we've personally done this with our FMO, where we've helped facilitate these succession plans and servicing agreements, we do kind of have a working template that we could start with, so you don't have to start from scratch. And like anything, like a life insurance policy, that's something that you probably want to review every year. You might go back. I know that we do this every year at Agent Equity Group. In fact, I think we're going to be doing this in the next couple of weeks, where we review that document. And, people, contenders, if you will, for buying the business, or if something were to happen, last year, people that were on that list, I'm like, screw that guy. I don't, we need to make sure we take that off type thing. So that evolves over time. And you don't necessarily have to go through an attorney to do that. It's not required. It's always good practice. Doesn't need to cost a lot of money. I want to say that for a couple $1,000s on average, if you do get an attorney involved, they would, be able to do that. The thing that gets a little difficult with the attorney thing is it's a very specialized area of law. Sometimes in a state planning attorney might be the best starting place for that. Mm-hmm. If you could find somebody that specializes in insurance law, if you could find those needles in a haystack out there, they definitely exist, but they're gonna be at a premium price for that specialty. But what I would say is, we do have templates that if you want to use those, we'll work with you. And then you can have those reviewed by an attorney. They can make amendments to that just to have like a starting point.
One thing I always like to jump in on when you say that, or any of us say that, is we're not trying to be opportunistic. If you don't want our help, please just do it with somebody. It's just
absolutely.
Just like life insurance. When your neighbor has a baby, you're saying, hey, do you have life insurance? No, they don't. Well, you should really get some. I can help you, but if you don't want my help, that's fine. But please do it with somebody, right? Yeah. So we're happy to help you, but you do not have to do it with us. We just find it very, very important.
Sure, yeah, and that's an interesting thought there too. So when it comes to that, the person that you want to identify, obviously you want them to know, right?
Well, Brian, we do have another story.
We have all sorts of stories, but many times it could be a colleague in the business, right? It also, for a lot of people, it's their spouse, right? And many times it's not necessarily that their spouse wants anything to do with the business or insurance, but it's just a safety guard that, hey, if something happens to you tragically, that at least your spouse is licensed, they can go get appointed, do their AHIP and things like that, and keep the revenue going. That wasn't really an option. Well, it was an option for me, but just telling a personal story here that my wife, she couldn't even make it through the pre-licensing stuff. Not that she wasn't mentally capable of it. It was just boring as hell, and it's just not something that she really wanted to pursue. So one thing I think that makes us a little unique as an FMO, and there's not too many of them out there that will take over retail practices. We do have a retail practice, Platinum Benefits, that then evolved into an FMO and into Agent Equity Group, where we've actually acquired many different agencies, things from like 50 policies all the way up to like 2,500 policies. And if you're really tight with that FMO or that organization, that could definitely be something that you want to consider doing. But keep in mind, that could evolve, that could change. In fact, we have done a servicing agreement where the servicing agreement has changed that. In fact, how I prefer to do it is to make it very open-ended and make sure that that document provides a lot of flexibility. In that, hey, if things changed, I don't want you to feel obligated. Right now, you're telling me you want us to take things over. but maybe somebody else has some opinions on that. Maybe at the end of the day, you want your spouse or somebody else to go shop that book or something like that. The servicing agreement that we've put together allows for that flexibility, that should that change, you're not locked into like, we were good friends and I really liked you, but now I kind of think you're an asshole and I don't want that FMO to buy it. Yeah, you're not locked in or anything like that. So
Would there be a way to do like a first right of refusal type of thing?
yeah,
too?
yeah. Actually, we've done that as well too. And that's why every agreement is different.
And it seems like the point would be to have something in place so that your revenue doesn't go away.
Yeah.
And like I mean, truly, with someone you trust, of course, but you can give them first right of refusal.
Mm-hmm.
You can say, if they say no, I want it to go to this agency.
Yep.
You just have to have something in place so that income doesn't go away.
Exactly. I mean, we've done things where if I become incapacitated, what's the definition of incapacitated, right? And maybe a spouse or a doctor has to sign off on that. Or maybe there are children that you want to get involved to where maybe they have first right of refusal. So it could be very personalized. I think that maybe the listeners might be thinking, guys, that's just a lot to think about. Like all of this stuff, just start, get a business entity, get an agency license. You know what? It could be this year, I'm just going to go and create an LLC.
Yeah.
Next year, I'm going to get an agency license. Year 3, I'm going to put together a template or an idea. I'm going to execute it in the 5th year. Again, if you're capable of doing that all at once and you have the fortitude to do that, then go ahead and do that. But just like everything, it evolves over time, and it's how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
I think that, so you look at the revenue that you're bringing in and that surviving spouse, partner, family, what have you. If that money still wasn't coming in, how much would they want you to do this planning?
Yeah, that is
So, I mean, if I'm only making 10 grand a year doing this, and I got a full-time job and I'm doing this on the side, like I stopped doing this, it's not as big of a deal.
Sure.
If this is my main revenue stream, I'm making, the main money for the family or for my group or what have you, or my charity that I give it all away to, they're counting on you for that continued revenue. Let me go through some closing thoughts and kind of a call to action. So a reminder, you worked so hard to build this book of business. Don't leave the future of it to chance. Again, we're in the insurance business. Please ensure the future of your revenue stream by starting your succession planning today, tomorrow, soon, or like Brian said, just make a plan for when you're going to do this. I want you to start to think about potential successors for your book of business, colleagues, family, friends, competitors, people that you've met in the industry, your upline, other agencies that you admire, that you feel confident that they would keep things going for your beneficiaries. Meet with an attorney and draft the documents. Go online, do some research, find out what you don't know so you can make a plan. And then just continue to grow your business until you're ready to walk away.
Yeah. Also, with that being said, tap into resources that are available to you, people that have been through that landmine so that you can avoid some of the pitfalls. And, open invitation to any of our agents. Heck, I don't care if you're not with Agent Equity Group. I just love helping people in general. I love talking about this topic just because I have experienced it, unfortunately, numerous times. I would love to have a discussion, whether that be in person, whatever, and just start the conversation, right?
Yeah. I'm going to add something on our website. If you want to schedule something like that with Brian, you can submit a request.
Yeah.
And we can try and make that happen. And I know we talked about a lot of things. Just to rapid fire what we talked about.
Sure.
Really, truly setting up your business for success and, getting your business incorporated, thinking about your succession plan. So from the start to the end. And the beautiful thing about the insurance industry is you can really customize it and you can take your time. But from what I've gathered from this conversation, which I am not an agent yet, but learning, is start thinking about this from the beginning, get everything in place at once. From the start of getting your LLC and naming your business, think about putting it into place, who could potentially take it over eventually. And yeah, we're here to help with whatever you need.
It's almost a little bit like planning a road trip,
Yeah.
right? You know where you want to go. You think about what you're going to need to get there. You make sure the car is in good working order. You've got air in the tires, gas in the tank, and you have a plan to go on this adventure. Like, just take a moment and plan.
Absolutely.
And also, there's going to be some construction, and you're probably going to take some detours, and it's going to evolve. So
yeah,
throw that in there.
absolutely.
For those of you that like to be on the cutting edge and up to date with all things going on in the industry, we'd recommend that you attend Medicarians. Going to be coming up at the end of March, the 31st, and going to April 2nd. That's 2025. It's in a pretty nice place, Las Vegas. For those of you that like to have a little bit of fun while you're working, great weather, great facilities, and some fantastic information. Definitely check it out. Again, it's Medicarians, March 31st through April 2nd in Las Vegas.
We'll have a link below.
And for any other reason, come just to meet, fellowship, and just general shenanigans. Because when I think of past events, the things I remember are the experiences I had with other agents and exploring the strip. Thank you.